Welcome to the Playing Books podcast.
Today, we're getting into a really remarkable story, a book that's, it's so much more than a business memoir.
It really is. We're talking about Unreasonable Hospitality, the remarkable power of giving people more than they expect by Will Guidara.
And this isn't just a story about a successful restaurant. I mean, it is that, but it's really a blueprint for how excellence and human connection can just redefine any business or any relationship, really.
Right. And the stage for this is 11 Madison Park, or EMP. When Guidara took over, it was, a beloved but kind of middling two-star French brasserie.
A great restaurant, but not a world-changing one.
Not at all. And under his guidance, his philosophy, it didn't just get better. It went like supernova. It became the #1 restaurant in the world.
Which is just an insane achievement.
Yeah.
But the core of the book, the argument he makes, is that the real success wasn't just about the food. The food had to be perfect. That was the baseline.
The price of entry.
Exactly. The real transformation happened when they started to approach everything else, the service, the team culture, even the finances, with, and this is a direct quote, the same passion, attention to detail, and rigor that we bring to our food.
And that is the whole pivot, isn't it? It's not just about making guests happy. It's about this uncompromising idea that if you want your team to obsess over the customer experience,
Then you, as the leader, have to obsess over your employees' experience first.
yes, he's so clear about it. He says great service cannot exist without great leadership. It's just impossible.
It really is. And for him, hospitality is about building a culture where everyone, from the newest dishwasher to a VIP guest, feels genuinely seen, valued, and safe.
It's not just fluffy feel-good stuff either. It's a system, a rigorous, intentional framework designed to deliver these incredible, bespoke moments time and time again.
It's practical magic, that's what he calls it. And it's supported by this intense, really thoughtful structure.
So in this episode, we're going to unpack that structure. We'll get into the emotional core of his philosophy, the specific business strategies, and of course, the wild, suspenseful stories like the legendary hot dog incident.
Oh, we have to talk about the hot dog.
We have to. And our mission for you, as you're listening, is simple. Don't just file this away as a cool restaurant story. Challenge yourself. Ask, how can I take these lessons, this idea of intentionality, of generosity, and apply them in my own life this week?
Yeah, whether you're leading a team, dealing with clients, or just, trying to have better relationships with the people around you, this book has something for you.
So listen for the amazing anecdotes for sure, but also listen for the systems, the frameworks that turn something totally ordinary into something extraordinary.
Let's get into it.
Okay, so let's start where all great philosophies really begin, which is, in a moment of deep personal learning. For Guidara, his whole world was steeped in service right from the beginning.
Absolutely. His mom was a flight attendant back in, the golden age of air travel. His dad was a top executive at American Airlines Catering. So service was just the language they spoke at home.
But the biggest lesson, the one that really shaped everything, came out of immense suffering.
Yeah. When he was only 4 years old, his mother was diagnosed with brain cancer. And over the next 2 decades, her health just spiralized. It gradually deteriorated. She became a full quadriplegic, and eventually she lost the ability to speak clearly.
And the image he paints from that time it's just almost unbearably powerful. He says that despite her physical state, the paralysis, the loss of mobility, she held on to this one daily ritual, and it completely changed his understanding of what it means to feel welcome.
That ritual was just waiting for him. Every single day, she'd have her health aide push her wheelchair all the way to the end of their long driveway, just so she could be there when he got home from school.
She couldn't hug him, she couldn't even speak to him clearly, but she would greet him with this huge, undeniable smile.
Think about that. That small, consistent, and physically difficult act. That pure intentional presence. That's what taught him, in his words, what it's like to feel truly welcomed.
It wasn't about a transaction, it wasn't service, it was this unconditional gift of self. And you can see how that planted the seed for this idea that hospitality is, at its core, an emotional exchange.
And that seed was just, violently cemented by an experience he had right after his mother died. He was in this deep state of grief, and he was supposed to go on this internship in Spain, but he was debating whether he should leave his father alone.
And his father, Frank, gave him the push he needed. He just said, what are you going to do? Sit around here and be sad. Get on the plane.
So before he flew out of JFK, Guidara reached out to the legendary chef, Daniel Boulud. He asked if he could possibly bring his father to his 3 Michelin star restaurant, Daniel, for one last dinner together.
And Boulud's response was just immediate, overwhelming. They didn't just get a table.
No. They were escorted to the skybox, this private glass room that overlooks the entire humming kitchen, a space that's usually reserved for, dignitaries and celebrities.
And the staff, they knew the circumstances. They knew what the family was going through. And they executed this meal with such grace, such precision, that Guidara describes it as an oasis of comfort and restoration, right in the middle of their deepest grief.
That experience, that's what solidified this idea of the nobility of service.
Right. It showed him the real purpose of hospitality. It's not just about selling food or, providing a service. It's about offering consolation and relief in the midst of their most difficult moments.
And he realized then that when you choose to be in the hospitality business, and he's really clear, this applies to any field, from accounting to IT to medicine, you have both the privilege and the responsibility to make magic.
I think that's such a critical point for anyone listening who isn't in the restaurant world. This idea of nobility applies everywhere.
Totally. If you're a lawyer handling a difficult case for a client, or a manager dealing with an employee who's struggling, you're in the service business. Your job is to provide that oasis of focus and professionalism, and to always recognize the human being underneath the transaction.
And that sense of intentionality, that deep purpose, he inherited that directly from his father, Frank Guidara Sr.
Oh, for sure. His dad's life was a masterclass in organized commitment. I mean, he was running a major division of a huge company, Restaurant Associates, and at the same time, he was managing his wife's incredibly complicated care.
Before he left for work every single day, he managed all the intricate logistics of her needs. Showering her, making sure she was fed. That kind of stamina isn't spontaneous. It has to be mapped out.
And that's what Guidara learned. Intentionality wasn't some spark of genius that just happens. It was a non-negotiable requirement for getting through the day.
So when you apply that to business, what does it mean? It means every single decision, from the most complex strategic plan down to, the seemingly mundane, like how a salt shaker is placed on a table.
Every single thing.
It all has to be done thoughtfully, with clear purpose and an eye on the desired result. There's no such thing as accidental excellence.
And you can see this focus in his own life, even from a young age. He tells this great story about being 13, driving back from SeaWorld, and setting these 3 massive life goals.
I love this. What were they?
Get into Cornell's prestigious hotel school, open a top restaurant in New York City, and marry Cindy Crawford.
Oh, 2 out of 3 ain't bad.
Exactly, but he jokes he ended up with someone even better. But the serious point behind the humor is the intention. From that moment on, everything he did, working at Baskin-Robbins, bussing tables at Spago, his college courses, it was all aligned with those very specific, stated goals.
It's a perfect example of how that deliberate focus, learned from his dad's example, can just shape an entire career.
So once Guidara graduates from Cornell, his real education begins. And it's this deliberate balancing act between 2 really different and often conflicting worlds.
He calls them corporate smart and restaurant smart.
Exactly. He starts with restaurant smart, landing a job at Danny Meyer's legendary Union Square Hospitality Group, or USHG. He was managing the front of the house at a restaurant called Tabla.
And Meyer's Group was, it was the gold standard for what he called enlightened hospitality. So that's where Guidara learned all the soft skills, the grace, the warmth, the art of service.
But his father, Frank, kept pushing him. He needed the other side, the financial rigor, the corporate smart piece. And that led him to this crucial, and at first, pretty miserable detour.
Right. He goes to Restaurant Associates, his dad's company.
And he goes from the glamorous front door of Tabla to the basement of the MetLife building. He became an assistant purchaser and controller.
So he's running spreadsheets, accounts payable, inventory, food costs, the black and white numbers.
It was his business school boot camp. And his mentor was this strict, old-school financial officer named Hani, who was the total embodiment of that financial discipline.
And this is where the famous lobster anecdote comes from, right?
It is. Hanani shows him that food costs at one of their restaurants are just skyrocketing, out of control. So Guidara runs the reports, and he realizes, okay, they're selling a massive amount of this really popular lobster dish.
Which sounds good on the surface.
Sounds great. But what he didn't realize, because he wasn't tracking it, was that the market price for lobster had just spiked, like dramatically, due to things totally outside their control.
So the corporate smart answer was brutal.
It was, but it was necessary. The dish, no matter how popular, had to come off the menu immediately, right now. until the cost came back down. There's just no sentimentality in the numbers.
And that forced him to connect what's happening on the floor, what's popular with guests, with the daily profit and loss statement in real time. He realized you absolutely need both, the creative soul of hospitality and the cold, hard logic of finance.
And that tension was always there. Later on, when he was managing the cafes at the Museum of Modern Art, he faced it again. How do you serve beautiful, expensive ingredients like imported prosciutto, but also control your costs?
What was the compromise?
It was a simple, smart solution. Instead of pre-making a bunch of sandwiches for the display case, which led to a ton of waste at the end of the day, they just started making the gourmet sandwiches to order during the final hour of service.
So the customer still gets a fresh, high-quality product.
And they saved thousands of dollars in food waste.
Yeah.
It's that creative compromise. It's being restaurant smart and corporate smart at the same time.
So that dual education was critical, but the cultural foundation really came from his time at USHG. Danny Meyer was a master at creating this shared language, these phrases that built instant alignment in the team.
Oh, they were so powerful. Things like constant, gentle pressure.
Which is based on the Japanese idea of kaizen, right? Always improving.
Yes, this idea that everyone, every day, is striving for these small, incremental improvements. And then there was athletic hospitality.
Meaning you have to be ready to play both offense and defense.
Right. Offense is anticipating a guest's needs, elevating their experience. Defense is apologizing and fixing a mistake quickly and graciously.
And my favorite, be the swan.
A classic. Graceful and serene on the surface, but paddling furiously and unseen under the water.
But the one phrase that Guidara really championed, the one that truly defined their whole approach to human interaction, was make the charitable assumption.
This is such a powerful culture-defining tool. It just means you intentionally assume the best possible motive behind any negative action or mistake you see.
So if an employee is late,
Instead of assuming they're lazy or unprofessional, the immediate default response from a manager has to be, "You're late. Is everything okay?"
it completely reframes the conversation. It starts from a place of support, not accusation.
And you extend that same radical grace to your guests, even the difficult ones. Guidara argues that when a customer is being rude or dismissive, the charitable assumption is that they might be having the worst day of their life.
A health scare, a huge fight, a looming deadline.
Exactly. And in that moment, they might need more love and more hospitality than anyone else in the room.
That shared language is what allowed them to maintain empathy, even under extreme pressure. And that culture was tested immediately when Guidara finally partnered with chef Daniel Hum at 11 Madison Park.
It was. Hum came from that classical European fine dining world where, the kitchen is king, the chef is supreme, and the front of the house, the dining room, is often seen as secondary.
And Guidara wanted to just smash that hierarchy completely.
It wasn't an easy negotiation at all. He tells the story of giving Hum an ultimatum right at the beginning. He said, if it's not a partnership, if what happens in the dining room doesn't matter as much as what happens in the kitchen, then I don't even want to start down this road.
And that led to this radical decision that EMP would be a restaurant run by both sides of the wall.
Which was just unheard of at that level.
Yeah.
They decided that every major decision would be made together, ensuring that whatever they did was best for the restaurant as a whole, not just for the food or just for the service.
But I have to push back a little on that. I mean, co-leadership between two completely different worlds, the creative culinary side and the service financial side, it sounds like a recipe for constant conflict, turf wars.
That's an excellent point, and it was difficult. The key was that they had to agree on a higher vision. The question was never, what does the chef want? Or what does the GM want? The question was always, what is best for 11 Madison Park?
So if the kitchen wanted to plate a dish that required, I don't know, a 12-step service routine at the table.
And the front of house team said, look, that's just too disruptive for the guest. The kitchen had to respect that. And vice versa. It forced this genuine collaboration that just didn't exist in other fine dining restaurants.
And this commitment to collaboration, to questioning everything, meant they had to interrogate all the sacred cows of fine dining.
And this is where Guidara realized that his lack of four-star experience was actually a massive asset. He called it his superpower.
Because he hadn't developed that automatic, unquestioning muscle memory that a lot of the veterans they hired had.
Right. Muscle memory is efficient, but it can kill innovation. He insisted that if the only answer to the question, why do we do it this way, is because that's how it's always been done, then that rule needs to be challenged immediately.
He felt that blind faith in tradition was why so many famous restaurants eventually became stale and closed.
Which brings us to the perfect kind of funny example of this, the canellas.
Ah, the notorious cannella.
So traditionally, at the very end of the meal at EMP, they would give guests these little dark rum and vanilla pastries. They were super difficult to make, required expensive copper molds and beeswax.
It was a total flex from the kitchen, a final, look how technically skilled we are.
Exactly, it was about showing off. But Guidara realized a few things. One, they were awesome stale. Two, most guests had no idea what they were. And three, they were totally forgotten by the next morning. Wasn't serving the guests.
So they ditched them, and they replaced them with something humble, delicious, and actually useful.
A simple jar of house-made coconut and pistachio granola.
It was so intentionally unpretentious, the message completely changed. It went from, look how good we are, to, here's something thoughtful from us for your breakfast tomorrow.
It was a huge step toward intentional humility and real connection.
All of this internal questioning, it led them to a big realization. Just being excellent curators of French food and French service wasn't enough. It wasn't going to get them to be the best in the world.
Right. After they attended the world's 50 Best Restaurants Awards in London, they understood they needed a truly unique, groundbreaking vision. Something like what Ferran Adrià in Spain or René Redzepi in Denmark had done by completely changing the game.
And they found their inspiration not in the food world, but in jazz. Specifically, the Miles Davis blueprint.
Exactly. A 2006 review of the restaurant had said EMP needed a bit of Miles Davis. And they seized on that. Miles Davis was famous not just for his genius, but for his constant, endless reinvention.
He never settled into one sound. He would alienate his fans and critics by constantly evolving, bebop to cool jazz to fusion.
And just as importantly, he was a master collaborator. He was famous for elevating the musicians around him, people like John Coltrane and Bill Evans.
So they took this idea and distilled it down into an 11-word roadmap for the future of EMP.
Words like cool, collaborative, endless reinvention, innovative, spontaneous, vibrant, adventurous. They latched onto collaborative as the engine that would drive all the others.
And this commitment to collaboration meant they had to tear down the traditional hierarchy walls completely. So they took this radical, truly unprecedented step.
Of inviting everyone to their strategic planning meetings.
And when you say everyone, you mean?
Everyone. The assistant general manager, the sous chefs, yes. But also the dishwashers, the bussers, the food runners. Everyone was in the room and expected to contribute.
But why? Why include the most junior staff in a high-level strategic discussion? Doesn't that just slow everything down?
Guidara argued the exact opposite. He recognized that the junior staff often have the cleanest, most unfiltered perspective on what's actually happening.
Because they're on the ground.
They're on the ground. He said, a busser sees all kinds of things a general manager never can. The GM sees the room from the podium. The busser is weaving through the tables, hearing snippets of guest conversation, spotting inefficiencies in the corners. You need that 360-degree view if you're serious about getting the details right.
And all of this collective input helped them identify their two core guiding goals.
Hospitality and excellence.
And the key is that those two things are inherently contradictory. They're in conflict.
And that's why naming them together was so powerful. It's easy to be hospitable if you don't care about the details, just be friendly and sloppy. It's also easy to enforce cold, rigid excellence through fear.
But true greatness.
True greatness, Guidara realized, requires embracing the constant necessary friction between the two. The team's job was to live in that tension, to be warm and precise at the same time.
This kind of integration required incredible leadership, especially when you're managing staff you've inherited, people who might have been overlooked or mismanaged before. Guidara's whole focus was on finding what he called hidden gifts.
And the story of Eleazar Cervantes is the absolute poster child for this approach.
So Eleazar was a food runner, and his managers had basically written him off. They said he was unenthusiastic, not interested in learning about the food.
Right. He was on his way out. But Guidara, instead of just firing him, took the time to observe him and understand his mind. He saw that Eleazar wasn't unenthusiastic. He was just quiet. But he also had this silent, innate authority and this absolute genius for organization.
So they moved him.
They moved him to the kitchen expediter role. And for anyone who doesn't know, the expediter or expo is probably the single most high-stress technical job in the entire restaurant.
It's like being an air traffic controller.
During a thunderstorm, you're standing between the kitchen and the dining room, orchestrating every single plate, making sure all the dishes for one table are finished at the exact same time, correcting mistakes, calling out orders.
It's pure chaos management.
And Eliasar was a prodigy at it. Guidara said watching him was like seeing someone play chess in 3 dimensions. He excelled because they put him in a role that leveraged his natural gifts for organization and leadership, instead of trying to force him to be this bubbly, social person he wasn't.
They turned a failing employee into one of their most indispensable assets.
And that kind of empathy extended to how the leaders behaved. Guidara built trust by demanding that his managers control their moods. If you were having a bad day, you couldn't let that bleed into your interactions with the team. And when you delivered criticism, it had to be immediate, focused on the behavior, and always done in private. You never created a wall of shame.
And crucially, the leader had to be accountable too.
100%. If a manager messed up the delivery, if they snapped at a server because they were stressed, they were required to apologize immediately, not for the feedback itself, but for the poor delivery, for the lack of emotional control.
And that practice must have built incredible trust. It allows feedback to land constructively.
It all culminates in this crucial daily ritual, the pre-meal meeting. Guidara mandated that they set aside 30 precious minutes every single day for this. He would even simplify other parts of the prep, like complicated butter presentations, just to buy back that time.
Because connecting the team was more important than any one micro detail.
Exactly. And the goal of that 30 minutes wasn't just to communicate the specials. It was about inspiration, celebrating wins, and most importantly, answering the question, why? Why are we doing this?
He would tell these little anecdotes to inspire moments of unreasonable generosity.
Like the story of him getting a haircut at this old New York barbershop. As he's paying, the gruff old barber just points to these 3 spigots on the wall, gin, vodka, and whiskey, and offers him a shot in a tiny disposable cup.
It's such a simple, almost ridiculous image.
It is. The shot was financially irrelevant. It cost nothing. But it was whimsical, and it was completely unexpected. It was a little dose of unreasonable generosity designed purely to surprise and delight.
So by sharing that story, he was challenging his team to look for their own little opportunities to do something like that.
Exactly. The pre-meal meeting was about filling the gas tank of the employees, reminding them of the joy and the nobility of their purpose before asking them to go out and serve others.
Okay, so this brings us to the big critical question, the business question. How do you possibly afford all of this? The grand gestures, the radical generosity, how do you do that without bankrupting the company?
And this is where Guidara instituted a system of financial discipline that directly enabled all the unreasonable stuff. He called it the Rule of 955.
This is probably the most practical, actionable business lesson in the whole book.
I think so. The 95% is where he applied all those hard lessons he learned at Restaurant Associates. That's where you are hyper-disciplined, fiscally responsible, corporate smart.
So that's the relentless vendor negotiations, the tight labor schedules, precise inventory control, minimizing waste.
All the rigorous, sometimes boring cost control machinery that keeps the lights on and ensures you have a healthy business. That's the foundation.
But then there's the other 5%.
And that remaining 5% is intentionally reserved for calculated extravagance and radical intentional hospitality. It is budgeted specifically for creating those moments of magic that defy all expectation.
And it's non-negotiable. That 5% has to be spent on the guest experience.
It's a line item in the budget. And the most famous example of that 5% in action has to be the story of the Spanish family and the snow.
Tell us that one.
So a family of 4 from Spain is dining at EMP. It's the last night of their New York vacation, and it's snowing heavily outside. The kids are just glued to the window, completely captivated, because they had never, ever seen real snow before in their lives.
Most managers would just say, oh, how sweet, and move on.
Guidara seized the moment. He spent the 5% budget. He immediately sent a team member out to a store to buy 4 brand new, colorful sleds.
No way!
Yep. And after the family finished their meal, there was an SUV waiting outside to whisk the entire family to Central Park, where they spent 2 hours playing in the freshly fallen snow.
That is just unbelievable.
Think about the ROI on that. The cost of the sleds and the car service was, in the grand scheme of things, pretty negligible. But the impact, the memory that family will tell for the rest of their lives, it's immense.
It perfectly solidifies that definition of unreasonable hospitality. It's not about giving more luxury, it's about giving more thought.
And that spirit of intentionality was also applied internally through what he called the ownership program. This was aimed at fixing the parts of fine dining that often got neglected. Things like coffee, beer, cocktails.
Because historically, the wine director, who was obsessed with wine, was responsible for all the beverages, and naturally, the other stuff just get less attention.
Right. But Guidara realized they had these specialists buried in the team. Young, enthusiastic geeks who were passionate about these things. He points to Jim Betts, the coffee fanatic. This was a guy who was willing to shave his huge lumberjack beard just to be presentable enough to work on the fine dining floor.
And Guidara just gave him the keys to the coffee program.
He did. And Jim completely transformed it. He changed all the suppliers and created this highly theatrical tableside experience. Instead of just getting a basic cup of filter coffee, guests were given a choice: a Chemex pour-over or this visually stunning vacuum pot siphon system.
So the coffee service went from being a total afterthought to being a core part of the culinary theater.
And this created what he calls the win-win-win principle. The team member Jim won by getting ownership and empowerment. The overall product won because now you had experts focusing on their specialties. The wine director could now focus 100% on wine.
And most importantly, the guests won because their experience was elevated across the entire board. Ownership just creates better outcomes.
But to keep that momentum going, they needed fuel. And that fuel often came in the form of external affirmation. Getting recognized by critics and peers was crucial for morale.
Right, like when they applied to the Relays and Chateau Association, which is this super stringent group of elite hotels and restaurants, the culinary giants.
Exactly. Thomas Keller, Daniel Boulud. The stakes were sky high. And when those legends did come to dine at EMP and offered praise, Guidara didn't hoard it. His strategy was to make sure his employees got that recognition directly.
Not filtered or diluted through layers of management?
No. If a great review specifically mentioned the creative beer pairings, he made sure the staff member responsible, Kirk Kellaway, got the credit. He put his name in the press releases.
And his friends warned him, right? They said if you give your staff that much public recognition, they're just going to get poached by your competitors.
They did. And his response was rooted in this radical faith in their mission. He believed the responsibility was on him to create a place so excellent, so inspiring, so caring that his people wouldn't want to leave.
He quotes Calvin Coolidge, "Persistence and determination alone are omnipotent." He had to build a vision that was bigger than any one job offer.
And the very first place they applied all these principles of unreasonable hospitality was literally the front door.
Yeah.
Transforming that initial greeting from a transaction into a real connection.
Think about the standard process at a busy restaurant. You walk up to a host stand. There's a maitre d' hiding behind a giant glowing iPad.
The dreaded podium.
Right. And you state your name, you wait while they find you, and then you're just directed to your table like cargo. It's efficient, but it is ice cold.
So EMP decided to erase that feeling completely. It took a ton of pre-work. The maitre d's, the actual people running the floor, had to study the reservation list intensely before service. They'd use Google Images, social media, whatever they could find to memorize faces.
So that when a guest walked in,
The goal was to greet them by name immediately, without them having to say a single word.
that's magical. But it's so hard to pull off consistently.
It is, and it connects back to the intentionality of the booking process. The same person who called you 2 days ago to confirm your reservation and ask if you were celebrating anything special.
What's the same person greeting you at the door?
Exactly. Ms. Sun, welcome back. My name is Justin. We spoke on the phone the other day. We're so excited to have you with us tonight. It builds a relationship before the guest even arrives.
And then the final stroke of genius at the end of the night, the coat check magic trick.
Yes, so you're walking out, you're digging through your pockets for that little paper claim tag, and you look up, and your coat is already there, waiting for you, held out by an attendant with a warm smile.
How did they do that without tags?
It's pure process innovation. The coat check team had to memorize the location of every single coat when it came in, pairing the coat's details. Black wool, tan, trench coat, with the table number.
So as soon as the guests asked for the check,
The server would radio the coat check team, who would race to find the right coats and have them waiting at the front door before the guests even got there. It turns that moment of awkward fumbling into one last delightful act of personalized attention.
so even after they achieved this massive goal, the New York Times 3-star review in 2008, the team was suffering. They were burning out.
Yeah, they were just running on fumes. Driven by this intense ambition, they had started adding all these little service flourishes that were just complicating the experience without actually making it better.
And this led to a key realization. Sometimes you have to slow down to speed up.
Guidara realized that if adding one more tiny element, even something as simple as a new butter presentation meant that the staff was doing everything else less well because they were overworked and stressed.
You had to walk it back.
You had to walk it back. They needed time to breathe so that they could execute the important things flawlessly. And they needed a system for managing the inevitable chaos and emotional pressure of a busy service.
So he introduced the Deep Breathing Club, or DBC.
He actually borrowed this from a system used in a juvenile psychiatric hospital. He knew that in a high-pressure kitchen or dining room, telling someone who's overwhelmed to calm down is the worst thing you can do. It just makes it worse.
So the system was incredibly simple. If a manager or a colleague saw someone who was visibly stressed, in the weeds, as they say, they would just walk up to them and quietly say, DBC.
And that was the signal. The staff member knew to stop, step aside for just a moment, and take a few deep, stabilizing breaths.
But the real power wasn't just the breathing, it was the communication behind it.
Exactly. What the manager was really saying was, I see you. I see what you're going through. We are in this together, and what can I do right now to help you? It just stripped away the stigma of being in crisis and allowed people to get immediate, focused support.
And complementing that was a system for asking for help. Kevin's lapel touch signal.
Because high achievers are often the most reluctant to admit they're overwhelmed. They don't want to look weak.
So they established the simple, silent signal. You make eye contact with a manager and you just touch your own lapel.
And Guidara really emphasized that this was a sign of confidence and strength, not weakness. He said that people who refuse to ask for help are deceiving themselves and doing a disservice to those around you.
These systems built up their mental fortitude, which was crucial because the next massive challenge was right around the corner.
The 2008 Great Recession.
Which was just brutal for the fine dining world. EMP was hemorrhaging cash. He talks about the surreal reality that they were basically being subsidized by the profits from Danny Meyer's new Shake Shack chain.
They were facing the very real possibility of collapse. And this is where his father's advice came back to him. Adversity is a terrible thing to waste.
So they were forced to go on a desperate but really creative offense.
They became laser-focused on efficiency, on waste reduction, but also on creating new revenue. They negotiated aggressively with all their vendors. They went after private events to fill their restaurant during off-peak times. They just realized that empty seats were their single biggest waste.
And that's what led them to introduce the famous $29 two-course lunch, which seems, dangerously cheap for a three-star restaurant.
It was a massive risk. It was designed to fill the seats and just bring energy back into the room. But the dividends were huge and totally unexpected. It wasn't about the profit margin on that lunch. It was about building relationships with tomorrow's CEOs.
The young professionals, the assistants, the mid-level managers who could now afford to come in and develop a loyalty to the brand.
And at the same time, they innovated sales within the meal, specifically with the introduction of this beautiful dessert cart.
Right, using the low and slow technique he'd learned years earlier.
He had a waiter walk very slowly through the dining room with this elaborate cart full of stunning desserts all at eye level. Guests would see it, their eyes would go wide, and suddenly they wanted dessert.
And sales just
skyrocketed by 300%. And the most important part of this whole period is that they got through it without laying off a single team member. They showed they cared for their people during the hardest times, and they emerged from the recession stronger than ever.
And that strong foundation is what enabled the ultimate expression of their philosophy, improvisational hospitality.
These are the singular bespoke gestures, and they were often executed by this dedicated staff he created called the Dream Weavers.
And the North Star for all of this, the most famous example, is the dirty water dog story.
Oh, it's the best. So Guidara is clearing plates from a European couple. They're having a wonderful meal, but they mention one regret about their trip to New York. They hadn't tried a stereotypical street hot dog, a dirty water dog.
Now, 99% of managers would just offer a sympathetic laugh and walk away.
But Guidara acted. He literally ran out of his 3 Michelin star restaurant, went to the Sabrits cart on the corner, and bought a $2 hot dog.
And then came the hard part, convincing the hyper-perfectionist Chef Hum to actually plate a street hot dog in his kitchen.
Hum was horrified at first, but then he got the joke. He embraced it. He sliced the hot dog into 4 perfect little pieces and plated it with these artistic, minimalist swipes of mustard and ketchup and these perfect little quenelles of house-made relish and sauerkraut.
And this $2 gesture, this perfect high-low culinary joke.
It became the absolute highlight of the guests' entire trip. It just proved, once and for all, that the cost is irrelevant. The thought, the memory, the impact, that's everything.
But Guidara realized you can't rely on your managers to pull off these moments on the fly while they're also running a busy service.
Right. So he created the Dreamweaver role, named after the Gary Wright song. This was a position dedicated solely to researching the guests and executing these personal, improvised moments.
They had their own workshop, right? Like Santa's workshop.
They did. A little studio with sewing machines, leather tools, metalworking equipment. Their job was to read the reservation notes, do a little digging, and just execute feats of magic.
Like the guy who was a huge sci-fi and wine nerd.
Exactly. So they surprised him by serving his wine in a custom-built decanter shaped like a Star Wars AT Walker.
Or the couple whose tropical vacation got canceled by a hurricane.
The Dreamweavers transformed their private dining room into a private beach. They brought in sand, beach chairs, tropical drinks, even a little kiddie pool.
These are what he calls priceless gestures.
And he learned that concept as a kid at his favorite restaurant, Ruth's Chris Steakhouse.
They had a secret off-menu appetizer, right? Fried calamari strips.
Yes. And you couldn't order it. They would only send it out to regulars, or as a peace offering if they'd made a mistake. And unlike a glass of vintage champagne, which has a known price, the calamari was priceless because its value was purely relational. It made you feel special, like you were in the club.
And EMP applied this thoughtfully, like with the engaged couple.
Yeah, an engaged couple is toasting with complimentary champagne, and they're served in these special Tiffany crystal flutes. At the end of the meal, they're sent home with those exact flutes in a beautiful gift box.
The cost to EMP was pretty small because they had a partnership with Tiffany.
But the impact was monumental. Those flutes became this tangible personal memory of their engagement. It just goes to show, luxury means giving more, but hospitality means being more thoughtful.
So as they're climbing the ranks, that tension between technical excellence and universal hospitality, it never goes away.
Never. And Guidara had to establish really clear rules for when you prioritize connection over being technically correct. The best example is the classic steak doneness dilemma.
We've all seen this happen. A guest orders a steak cooked medium rare, the server brings it out, and the guest says, "This is rare."
And everything in that server, all their training for precision, wants them to correct the guest. To say, well, actually, sir, based on the temperature, that is a perfect medium rare, but I can take it back if you prefer medium.
And that is the exact moment that technical correctness just crushes hospitality.
The server might be right, according to the textbook, but being right is irrelevant when your goal is to make the guest feel happy and seen. Correcting them just shames them and breaks that connection you've worked so hard to build.
So the only acceptable response is,
Absolutely, sir, I'm so sorry. And you fix it immediately, without question. This gave birth to the foundational EMP mantra. Their perception is our reality.
it doesn't matter what the thermometer says. If the guest perceives it as undercooked, then for them it is undercooked.
Exactly. Letting go of that ego allows you to focus on true service. And then the next step is to make a note in this system. This guest orders medium rare, but prefers medium. True hospitality anticipates their needs for the next visit.
This desire for a genuine low-ego connection led to another radical move, changing the menu itself to force a dialogue.
Right. Danny Meyer always said hospitality is a dialogue, not a monologue, and Guidara wanted to make that literal, so they moved away from a traditional descriptive menu and started listing dishes only by their main ingredient.
Beef, duck, lobster, cauliflower, that's it.
It's it. So the server couldn't just take an order, they had to have a conversation. They had to ask the guests how they felt like eating, what textures they liked, what flavors appealed to them. It engaged the guest in the creative process.
And even more radically, they started asking guests what they didn't like, not just about allergies.
Which is such a vulnerable question to ask in a fine dining setting. But it meant the kitchen had to be ready to pivot, to invent a new component on the fly if a guest hated, say, celery or mushrooms.
It transformed the service into this completely transparent dialogue.
And then, by 2015, they'd achieved massive success, but they were struggling under the weight of their own complexity. The meal had ballooned to 15 courses. There were 90 service interruptions per table.
They were pandering. They weren't serving what they genuinely felt was best.
So Guidara and Hum had this pivotal late-night conversation. They counted the interruptions and realized they had to get back to simplicity and authenticity. They distilled their entire vision down to one simple, elegant phrase that they posted above the time clock.
To be the most delicious and gracious restaurant in the world.
And this final change was subtractive. They cut the menu in half, down to 7 courses. They focused only on the most essential, most memorable dishes. And that paring down, Guidara argues, led to clarity, authenticity, and confidence. It removed all the noise.
And that clarity is what led them directly to the pinnacle, winning the #1 spot on the 50 Best list in 2017.
He reflects that their pursuit of excellence is what got them a seat at the table. But it was their unwavering commitment to unreasonable hospitality, to making everyone they worked with and served feel seen and heard. That's what took them to the top.
And then there's the epilogue, which is so powerful. Guidara's decision to walk away from the company he and Daniel Hum built together.
It's a profound final act of hospitality. Their partnership had reached a point of divergence. And Guidara, again applying his father's advice, asking what right looks like, realized that holding on would just rip the company apart.
So the ultimate act of selfless service was to let go.
As painful as it was, right, meant one of them had to walk away so that the company they built could continue as a strong, unified entity. It just reinforces that nobility of service. Sometimes the greatest service you can provide is stepping aside for the collective good.
So that brings us to the end of our exploration of unreasonable hospitality. We've gone from the emotional roots of service in Guidara's childhood, through the financial discipline of the 955 rule, and all the way to the improvisational genius of the Dreamweavers.
We've covered the core principles. That deep intentionality in every single detail, the budgetary magic of that 5% buffer, leveraging affirmation, hiring for emotional intelligence, and of course adopting the mantra that their perception is our reality.
And now, here's our final challenge to you. We've given you the roadmap, so what are you going to do with it? What is your 5%? Is it a slice of your time, a bit of your budget, or just some emotional bandwidth you can dedicate this week to an act of intentional, unreasonable generosity?
Who on your team needs ownership and validation right now, like Elias or Cervantes did? And where in your professional or your personal life can you apply that idea, their perception is our reality, to solve a point of friction?
We really encourage you to go out and purchase the book, Unreasonable Hospitality. Our discussion here only scratches the surface of the vivid stories and the profound, actionable systems that Will Guidara shares.
Buying the book is absolutely the best way to get the full spectrum of these insights and start applying them to your own world.
And since we're talking about connection and dialogue, we invite you to engage with the author, Will Guidara, on social media. Share your own experiences of giving or receiving unreasonable hospitality. We would love to see the magic that you create.
And if this episode has inspired you, we ask for your active participation. Share this Playing Books podcast episode with someone you feel needs a little inspiration in their professional or personal life. It's truly the highest compliment you can give us.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the Playing Books podcast. We hope this has given you a clear blueprint for achieving excellence through humanity.
Follow, subscribe, and share the Playing Books podcast wherever you listen. We look forward to diving into the next great read with you soon.